How does a man react when his own brother takes $180,000 and then writes that he is no longer family? I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. Before dawn, I used the same system that had always protected us. And when my brother checked his phone, he finally understood what that message really cost. Before we go any further, take a second to subscribe, hit the hype button, and like the video. It really helps the channel grow. And tell us in the comments, what would you do in this situation? I was 17 when our parents were gone. Reid was 10. There was no inheritance, no safety net, no relatives stepping up to help. Just me, a high school diploma I'd barely finished, and a kid who looked at me like I had all the answers. I didn't. But I learned. I worked nights at a warehouse while taking business classes during the day. Reid got new shoes when he needed them. He got school supplies, birthday cakes, trips to the park on Sundays. I made sure he never felt what I felt, that sinking terror of being completely alone. By the time I was 25, I had my first business. Small consulting firm, nothing glamorous. By 30, I'd expanded into 3 states. Reid went to college on my dime. I covered his rent, his books, his car when it broke down. When he graduated and couldn't find work immediately, I kept him afloat for 8 months. Never asked for repayment. Never kept a running tab. That's what brothers do, right? Reid met Natalie when he was 30. She worked in marketing, came from a family that owned a modest house in the suburbs. Her father, Harold, had been a contractor before retirement. Her mother, Elaine, spent her days planning renovations and redecorations that never quite materialized. The wedding was small. I paid for half of it without being asked. 2 years later, Reid called with excitement in his voice. Harold and Elaine wanted to renovate their house. New kitchen, updated bathrooms, structural improvements. It was a big project, and they were a little short on funds. "Could you help out?" Reid asked. "Just a loan. We'll pay you back." I should have asked more questions. I should have requested a timeline, a contract, something in writing. But this was Reid, my brother, the kid I'd raised, the one I'd given everything to make sure he had a future. I transferred $180,000 the next day. The renovation took 6 months. I wasn't consulted on a single decision. Not the countertops, not the fixtures, not the layout. When I drove by once to see the progress, Harold was in the driveway, directing workers. He waved politely, like I was a neighbor passing through. I wasn't invited inside. "They want it to be a surprise," Reid said when I asked. When the work was finished, there was a family dinner to celebrate. I wasn't invited to that either. "It's just immediate family," Natalie explained over the phone. "You understand." I did understand. I understood that $180,000 had bought their comfort, their upgraded kitchen, their modern bathrooms, and I had no claim to any of it. No ownership, no acknowledgement, not even a thank you card. I waited. Maybe they needed time to get their finances in order. Maybe Reid was embarrassed and wanted to surprise me with repayment. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation I wasn't seeing. 3 months passed, then 6, then a year. Reid's social media filled with photos of family gatherings at the renovated house. Natalie posted pictures of the new kitchen with captions about family effort and dreams coming true. Harold grilled on the new patio. Elaine hosted book club in the redesigned living room. I scrolled past them without commenting. At 18 months, I sent a polite text to Reid. "Hey, wanted to check in about the loan. No rush, just wanted to see where we're at." He replied 3 days later. "Things are tight right now. We'll get to it." That was all. I didn't push. Another 6 months crawled by. Reid's texts became less frequent. Our phone calls shortened. When we did talk, he was distracted, always cutting conversations short because Natalie needed him, or Harold wanted help with something in the yard. I started to feel like a stranger. No, worse than that. I felt like an ATM that had served its purpose and was now obsolete. 2 years after the transfer, I sat in my home office on a Tuesday evening, reviewing financial reports. My business was doing well. I had investments, savings, a comfortable life. The $180,000 hadn't ruined me, but it had changed something. I couldn't name it yet, but I felt it. A slow erosion of trust, a quiet realization that the boy I'd raised wasn't the man I thought I knew. My phone buzzed, a message from Reid. I opened it, expecting another delay, another excuse. Instead, I got this. Kian, I need to be honest. Natalie and I have been talking, and we think it's best if we create some distance. Her family has been really supportive, and they feel like my real family now. I know you did a lot when we were younger, but that was a long time ago. We've grown apart. I don't think we should keep pretending we're close. Take care. I read it twice, then a third time. The words didn't change. My real family now. I set the phone down on the desk. My hands were steady. My breathing was calm. There was no surge of anger, no impulse to call him and demand an explanation. Just clarity. Cold, absolute clarity. Reid hadn't just taken my money. He'd taken my loyalty, my years of sacrifice, my belief that family meant something. And he'd traded it all for a renovated kitchen and the approval of people who'd never done a single thing for him. And now he was telling me I was disposable. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the darkening sky. For the first time in 25 years, I felt no obligation, no guilt, no need to protect him. I picked up my phone again. Not to reply to Reid, there was nothing to say to him. Instead, I opened my banking app. The coffee shop opened at 6. I was there at 6:15, sitting in the corner booth with a black coffee I wasn't drinking and a phone I wasn't looking at. Reid's message sat unread in my notifications. I'd seen enough. Around me, the morning crowd filtered in, contractors grabbing breakfast sandwiches, office workers clutching travel mugs, students hunched over laptops. The noise was comforting. It reminded me that the world kept moving regardless of personal collapses. I thought about the last time Reid and I had shared a meal, 4 months ago, a diner not far from here. He'd been distracted the whole time, checking his phone every few minutes, texting Natalie about paint samples for the guest bedroom. I'd paid the bill. I always paid the bill. "You good?" he'd asked as we left. "Yeah," I'd said. "I'm good." Lies we tell to keep peace. Now, sitting in this coffee shop with his rejection message glowing in my peripheral vision, I understood something fundamental. Reid had been preparing to cut me loose for a long time. The message wasn't impulsive. It was a conclusion he'd arrived at carefully, probably with Natalie's encouragement. I wasn't family. I was a creditor he'd decided not to repay. I opened my banking app and navigated to the transaction history. The $180,000 transfer was easy to find, marked as family support in my notes, dated 2 years and 2 months ago. I tapped on it. The details screen showed the recipient account, the date, the amount. Below that, a small notation I'd added at the time. Reid, house renovation, to be discussed, not gift, not donation, to be discussed. I took a screenshot, then backed out of the app. My coffee had gone cold. I didn't care. I wasn't here for caffeine. I was here because my home office suddenly felt too quiet, too full of memories I didn't want to sit with. The door chimed. An older man walked in, nodded at the barista, ordered his usual. I watched him without really seeing him. My mind was elsewhere, tracing pathways, mapping consequences. If Reid believed I was no longer family, then he'd just reclassified our relationship. And if we weren't family, then the $180,000 wasn't a gift between brothers. It was a loan. A loan I'd never formalized because I'd trusted him. Big mistake. I pulled up my contacts and scrolled to Martin Calder, my business lawyer. We'd worked together for a decade. Contract disputes, partnership agreements, liability shields. Martin didn't do emotions. He did structure. I typed out a message. Need to discuss a personal financial matter. Available this week? His reply came within 2 minutes. Thursday at 2. Office. Efficient. Exactly what I needed. I pocketed my phone and finally took a sip of the cold coffee. It tasted bitter, but I forced it down anyway. Across the room, a young couple laughed at something on a shared phone screen. The woman leaned into the man's shoulder. He kissed the top of her head. I looked away. Reid used to look up to me like that. When he was 12, 13, even into his early 20s. I was the one he called when things went wrong, when he needed advice, when he wanted someone to be proud of him. Somewhere along the way, that shifted. Natalie's family offered him something I couldn't, normalcy maybe. A traditional family structure with parents who were present, siblings who gathered for holidays, a house that felt like a home instead of a survival strategy. I didn't begrudge him that, but I did begrudge the assumption that I could be erased without consequence. My phone buzzed again. Not Reid this time. A calendar reminder. Review quarterly reports. I dismissed it. Work could wait. I needed to think. I needed to plan. I needed to understand exactly what leverage I had, because one thing was certain: Reid wasn't getting away with this. Not the money, not the disrespect, not the casual dismissal of everything I'd sacrificed. But I wasn't going to scream at him. I wasn't going to show up at his apartment and demand answers. I wasn't going to involve Natalie or her parents in some messy confrontation. That's not how you handle people who think they've won. You let them think they've won, and then you move in silence. I finished the coffee, left a tip on the table, and walked out into the early morning light. The air was cool, crisp, the kind of morning that makes you believe in fresh starts. I didn't believe in fresh starts. I believed in consequences. The bank branch was quiet at 10 a.m. on a Thursday. A few customers at the teller windows, one couple meeting with a loan officer in the glass-walled cubicle near the entrance. I bypassed them all and headed straight for the offices in the back. Lucas Hale was expecting me. "Kian," he said, standing as I entered. "Good to see you." We shook hands. Lucas had managed my business accounts for 6 years. Professional, no nonsense, exactly the kind of banker who didn't ask questions unless they were relevant. "I need to review a personal transfer I made 2 years ago," I said, sitting across from his desk. "Sure, account number?" I gave it to him. He typed, scrolled, clicked. His expression didn't change as he scanned whatever appeared on his screen. "Here it is. November 2 years back. $180,000 to an account under Reid Marin. Notation says family support. What do you need?" "Structure," I said. "Was this documented as a gift, or is there any language that could reclassify it?" Lucas tilted his head slightly. "From the bank's perspective, it's just a transfer. We don't classify personal transactions as gifts or loans unless there's specific documentation filed. Did you sign anything at the time?" "No." "Then it's neutral. Could go either way, depending on intent and subsequent communication." "What if intent was never clarified?" "Then it defaults to the relationship and context." Lucas leaned back. "Between family members, courts usually assume gifts unless there's clear evidence of an expectation of repayment. But if you have written communication, texts, emails, anything indicating this was meant to be repaid, that changes things." I pulled out my phone and showed him the screenshot of my banking app notation. "Reid, house renovation, to be discussed." Lucas studied it. "That's not definitive, but it's a start. Do you have anything else? Messages, agreements?" "I have a text from 18 months ago asking about repayment. He replied saying he'd get to it." "That helps. Shows acknowledgement of obligation." "Can you print a full transaction record for this transfer? Date, amount, recipient, everything?" "Give me 2 minutes." While he worked, I stared out the window at the parking lot. A woman loaded groceries into her trunk. A man helped an elderly person into a car. Ordinary people doing ordinary things, unaware that someone nearby was quietly dismantling a relationship. Lucas handed me a printed statement. "Anything else?" "Not today. Thanks." I left the bank with the document folded in my jacket pocket. 2 hours later, I was parked outside a hardware store when I saw Harold Whitcomb's truck pull into the lot. I hadn't planned to follow him. I'd been driving, thinking, and somehow ended up here. Harold climbed out, phone pressed to his ear, laughing about something. He looked comfortable, relaxed. My $180,000 had bought him that comfort. I watched as he ended the call and walked toward the entrance. Another man, a contractor by the look of his work boots and paint-stained jeans, approached him near the door. "Harold, how's the house treating you?" Harold grinned. "Like a dream. That renovation was the best decision we ever made." "Family help out?" "A bit. Mostly our savings and some support from the kids. You know how it is." Support from the kids. I sat in my car, hands on the steering wheel, and let that sink in. Harold had accepted $180,000 from me and reduced it to some support from the kids, not even my name. Just a vague acknowledgement that money had appeared. I started the engine and drove to Martin Calder's office. Martin's office smelled like leather and old paper. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined one wall, filled with legal texts and case files. His desk was immaculate. One laptop, one legal pad, one pen. "Kian," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "What's the situation?" I laid out everything. The $180,000 transfer, the renovation, the lack of communication, Reid's message, the text asking about repayment, Harold's dismissive comment. Martin listened without interrupting. When I finished, he tapped his pen against the legal pad. "Do you want the money back or do you want to make a point?" "Both." He nodded slowly. "Then we need to reclassify this as a formal loan and issue a demand for repayment. Based on what you've told me, we have enough to establish intent. Your notation in the banking app, the text exchange, the fact that Reid acknowledged it as something to be repaid, that's a pattern. What's the process? I draft a demand letter. We send it certified mail to Reid and to Harold, since the money went into their property. We outline the loan amount, the expectation of repayment, and a reasonable timeline. 30 days is standard. And if they ignore it? Then we file a civil suit. It won't be fast, but it will be public, and given the amount, we can request documentation of how the funds were used, which means Reid and Harold will have to justify every dollar." I thought about that. Reid scrambling to gather receipts, Natalie panicking, Harold realizing that some support had legal teeth. "What are the risks?" I asked. "Minimal. Worst case, they argue it was a gift and we end up in mediation. But your documentation is solid. The phrase 'to be discussed' in your banking notation is key. It implies an open obligation." "How long does this take?" "The letter goes out within a week. Certified delivery takes a few days. They have 30 days to respond. If they don't, we file. After that, it depends on their cooperation." Martin leaned forward slightly. "I should mention, once we start this process, it becomes a matter of public record. Anyone searching court documents will see it. That includes Reid's employer, Natalie's colleagues, Harold's friends in the contractor community." "Good," I said. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment. "There's also the matter of interest. We can include accrued interest from the date of transfer. At a reasonable rate, say 5% annually, that adds approximately $18,000 to the total." I hadn't thought about interest, but Martin was right. If this was a loan, interest was standard. "Include it," I said. "That brings the total demand to $198,000. Plus legal fees if we go to court." The number hung in the air between us. Martin set his pen down. "Kian, I need to ask this once, and I need you to answer honestly. Is this about the money, or is this about what Reid said?" I considered the question, really considered it. "It's about both," I said finally. "The money matters because it represents every time I put him first, every sacrifice I made, every emergency I covered. He took all of that and called it nothing. So yes, I want the money back. But more than that, I want him to understand that actions have consequences." Martin nodded. "That's what I needed to hear. Because if this was just about anger or hurt feelings, I'd tell you to walk away. But this?" He gestured to the documents spread across his desk. This is about principle, and principle is worth fighting for. Do it. Martin picked up his pen. I'll need copies of everything: bank records, text exchanges, any emails. Also, write down a timeline. When you gave him money before this, what you covered, how long you supported him. We may not use all of it, but I want a complete picture. I handed him the printed statement from Lucas. I'll send the rest tonight. One more thing, Martin said. This will likely end your relationship with Reid. Permanently. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Reid's message. Her family has been really supportive, and they feel like my real family now. He ended it already, I said. I'm just making it official. Martin nodded and made a note on his legal pad. I'll have the demand letter drafted by Friday. You'll review it before we send it. How detailed should my timeline be? Everything. College tuition, rent payments, car repairs, wedding costs. I want to show a pattern of financial support over decades. It establishes that you were the provider, which makes Reid's claim of a gift harder to sustain. I left his office feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Not happy, not yet, but clear, purposeful. The next stop was Owen Price's accounting firm, located in a glass building downtown. Owen had handled my business taxes for years, sharp, methodical, and completely indifferent to personal drama. His office was smaller than Martin's, but just as organized. 2 monitors on his desk, a whiteboard covered in financial calculations, a filing cabinet that probably contained every receipt I'd ever submitted. Kian, he said when I walked in. This isn't tax season. It's not about taxes. I need a financial exposure assessment. Owen raised an eyebrow but gestured to the chair. Explain. I gave him the abbreviated version, the $180,000, the reclassification, the demand letter, the potential lawsuit. You want to know if pursuing this creates liability for you, Owen said. Exactly. He opened his laptop and pulled up my financial records. Let me see what we're working with. For 10 minutes, Owen typed and scrolled, occasionally making notes on a pad beside his keyboard. I watched the numbers flash across his screen: account balances, investment portfolios, business revenue projections. Finally, he turned the monitor toward me. Here's what I'm seeing. Your current net worth is approximately $2.3 million. The $180,000 represents about 8% of that. Significant, but not catastrophic. What if I lose in court? Legal fees for a case like this could run anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000, depending on complexity and duration. If you lose, you're out those fees plus court costs, maybe another $5,000. Total exposure, $25,000, worst case. And if I win, you recover the $180,000 plus interest, which Martin mentioned would be about $18,000, plus your legal costs. Reid and Harold split the financial hit. They're looking at around $2,000 and $20,000 total once you factor in their own legal fees. Owen leaned back in his chair. From a purely financial standpoint, the risk-reward ratio is heavily in your favor. You're risking $25,000 to recover nearly $200,000. What about tax implications? The repayment itself isn't taxable. It's a return of principal. The interest portion is taxable as income, but we're talking about $18,000. At your tax bracket, you'll pay about $6,000 on that. Still a net gain of $192,000. He pulled up another screen. I also ran a projection of what would happen if you don't pursue this. That $180,000 invested conservatively over the next 20 years would grow to approximately $480,000. By not recovering it, you're essentially giving Reid $500,000. I hadn't thought about it that way. What about reputational risk? I asked. Owen shrugged. Depends. If Reid tries to spin this as you being vindictive, some people might believe him. But most people understand that $180,000 isn't pocket change. The ones who matter will see this for what it is. Which is? A man protecting his interests after being taken advantage of. There's no shame in that. In fact, most business owners would respect it. You're showing that you don't allow people to exploit you, even family. That's a strength, not a weakness. He closed his laptop. I'll send you a formal exposure analysis by tomorrow. But my professional opinion? Pursue it. The numbers are on your side, and the precedent it sets, that you won't be taken advantage of, is valuable beyond the dollar amount. I stood to leave, then paused. Owen, if someone asked you whether this was worth it, what would you say? He considered the question. Financially? Absolutely. You're likely to recover most, if not all, of the principal plus interest. Emotionally? He shrugged. That's not my area. But I've seen enough family disputes to know this. The ones who walk away without fighting always regret it. Not because of the money, but because they let someone get away with it. They spend years wondering if they should have stood up for themselves. You won't have that regret. I left his office with that thought circling in my mind. The city was busy around me, people rushing to meetings, grabbing lunch, living their lives. I walked slowly, letting the rhythm of the sidewalk clear my head. Reid had made a choice when he sent that message. I was making mine now. By the time I got home, it was evening. The house was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic. I sat in my office and opened my laptop. Martin's email was already waiting, a draft of the demand letter. I read it carefully. It was perfect, formal, unemotional, devastating. It outlined the $180,000 transfer, cited the banking notation, referenced the text exchange, and demanded full repayment within 30 days. It named Reid as the primary debtor and Harold as a secondary recipient of the funds, given that the money had been used to renovate his property. The letter included a breakdown: $180,000 principal, $18,000 in accrued interest at 5% annually, total demand of $198,000. At the bottom, Martin had included a line: failure to respond will result in legal action, including but not limited to civil litigation and public filing of a formal complaint. Public filing. That meant Reid's friends, Natalie's co-workers, Harold's contractor buddies. They'd all see it. They'd all know. I made one small edit, changing 30 days to 21 days, and sent it back to Martin with a note. Approved. Send it. His reply came within minutes. We'll go out Monday morning. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of my office. 3 days from now, Reid would receive that letter. He'd open it, read it, and realize that everything had changed, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The next week moved in slow motion. I went to work, attended meetings, reviewed contracts. On the surface, everything was normal. Underneath, I was counting days. Martin sent the demand letter on a Monday. Certified mail, signature required. By Wednesday afternoon, the tracking showed it had been delivered to Reid's apartment at 2:47 p.m. Someone had signed for it, probably Reid himself. I imagined him standing at his door, pen in hand, scrawling his name on the receipt. The mail carrier handing him the envelope. That moment of curiosity before he opened it. Then the realization. I didn't hear anything. Thursday came and went. Then Friday. Complete silence. No calls, no texts, no emails. Reid didn't try to reach out through mutual acquaintances. Natalie didn't send any messages. Even Harold and Elaine remained invisible. It was as if they'd all collectively decided that ignoring the letter would make it disappear. It wouldn't. On Saturday morning, I drove out to a trail I hadn't visited in years. The kind of place Reid and I used to hike when he was younger. Back then, he'd complained about the distance, the bugs, the heat. But he'd always followed me, his small hand gripping his water bottle, his sneakers kicking up dust on the path. "Why do we have to come here?" he'd ask. "Because it's good for you," I'd say. "But it's boring." "You won't think so when you're older." He never believed me. Now, walking alone, I realized how much space his absence created. Not painful space, just empty. The trail wound through dense trees, opening occasionally to reveal views of the valley below. I stopped at a lookout point and stared at the landscape. Somewhere down there, Reid was probably waking up in his apartment, making coffee, texting Natalie about weekend plans. Maybe they'd already discussed the letter. Maybe they were panicking. Or maybe they were convincing themselves it was a bluff, that I'd never actually follow through. They'd learn soon enough. I spent an hour on the trail, then drove back into the city. The day stretched ahead of me, empty, quiet, mine. I stopped at a bookstore, browsed for a while, bought nothing. Had lunch at a small cafe where no one knew my name. Anonymous. Free. By Sunday night, I was back in my office, checking email. Nothing from Martin, nothing from Reid. But there was a message from Owen, the financial exposure analysis he'd promised. I opened the attached PDF and skimmed through it. Everything he'd already told me, now formatted in clean tables and graphs. Low risk, high potential recovery, minimal personal liability. At the end, he'd included projections showing what the recovered funds could generate over 5, 10, and 20 years if invested properly. The numbers were significant. At the bottom, he'd added a personal note. Kian, whatever you decide, make sure it's your decision. Not anger, not revenge, just clarity. I appreciated that. But Owen was wrong about one thing. This wasn't anger. Anger burns hot and fast. This was cold, calculated. The kind of response you give when someone mistakes kindness for weakness. Reid had written me off as if I were nothing. Fine. Now he'd learn what that cost. Monday morning, I went to the gym before work, lifting weights, running on the treadmill, pushing my body until my mind cleared completely. The physical exhaustion felt good, productive, purposeful. By the time I got home and showered, I felt steady, ready. I made coffee, sat at my desk, and opened my calendar. Martin had scheduled a follow-up call for Tuesday at 10 a.m., 3 weeks since the letter had been delivered. If Reid hadn't responded by then, we'd move to the next phase. Filing, public record, no going back. I was ready. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in months. I went through old photo albums, physical ones, from before everything was digital. Pictures of Reid as a kid. Birthday parties I'd thrown for him. School events I'd attended. Holidays we'd celebrated together. In every photo, he was smiling. In most of them, I was in the background, holding a camera, setting up decorations, carrying groceries. Always there, always providing, never asking for recognition. I closed the album and put it back on the shelf. Those days were over. Reid had made his choice. He'd decided that the life I'd built for him, the sacrifices I'd made, the years I'd given, none of it mattered compared to the approval of people who'd done nothing for him. So be it. I went to bed early that night and slept deeply. No dreams, no interruptions. Just solid, restful sleep. The kind you get when you know you're doing the right thing. Tuesday morning arrived. I was at my desk by 9, coffee in hand, laptop open. At exactly 10 a.m., my phone rang. Martin. Kian, checking in. Anything from Reid? Not a word. No response to the demand letter. No attempt to contact me. Nothing. So we file. We can, Martin said. But I want to make sure you're absolutely certain. Once we file, this becomes public record. Reid will have to respond, and it won't be pretty. His name will be attached to a lawsuit. Anyone who searches for him online will see it. I thought about that. Reid applying for jobs, Natalie's family Googling his name, Harold explaining to his contractor friends why his son-in-law was being sued for nearly $200,000. I'm certain. There was a pause on the other end. Then, all right, I'll draft the complaint today. We'll file by end of week. What happens after that? Reid gets served with a summons and complaint. He has 20 days to file a response. If he doesn't, we move for default judgment, which means we win automatically. If he does respond, we proceed to discovery, and eventually mediation or trial. Timeline? 4 to 6 months if it moves quickly. Could be longer if Reid fights it hard. But based on what we have, I don't think he'll want to go to trial. The evidence is too strong. What about Harold? He's named as a co-defendant since the funds were used on his property. Legally, both he and Reid are liable. If one can't pay, the other is responsible for the full amount. Good. Martin hesitated. Kian, I've been doing this for 20 years. Most people who sue family members end up regretting it. Not because they were wrong, but because the fallout is harder than they expect. Holidays become complicated. Mutual friends take sides. The emotional toll can be significant. Are you prepared for that? Reid ended this relationship, I said. I'm just closing the paperwork. Martin was quiet for a moment. Then, fair enough, I'll keep you updated. I ended the call and sat back in my chair. This was it. The point of no return. Outside my window, the city moved at its usual pace. Cars passed, people walked dogs, life continued, indifferent to personal wars. I thought about Reid opening his door in a few days to find a process server standing there with official documents. I thought about his face draining of color as he read the complaint. I thought about Natalie looking over his shoulder, her voice rising in panic, and I felt nothing. No guilt, no hesitation, no second thoughts, just satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing you've stopped allowing someone to exploit you. I spent the rest of the day working, calls with clients, contract reviews, strategic planning. By evening, I'd nearly forgotten about the lawsuit. Nearly. Around 7, my phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. I opened it. Kian, this is Natalie. We need to talk. Call me. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I deleted it. 10 minutes later, another text. This time from a different unknown number. What the hell is this? You're suing me? Over money I thought was a gift? This is insane. Call me. Reid. He'd changed his number or was texting from someone else's phone. I read the message twice, then typed a single sentence. Respond through your lawyer. I didn't wait for a reply. I blocked the number immediately. Another text came through from Natalie's number. You're tearing this family apart over money. Is that really who you are? Reid needs you. Don't do this. I blocked her number too. The silence that followed was profound. No buzzing, no notifications, no desperate pleas. Just me, my desk, and the faint hum of the city outside. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. This was what clarity felt like. No noise, no manipulation, no guilt, just the steady, inevitable march of consequences. That night, I slept better than I had in years. 3 weeks passed. Reid hired a lawyer. I knew because Martin forwarded me the response to the complaint, a thin document, barely 8 pages, that argued the $180,000 had been a gift and that I was acting out of spite. Weak, Martin said over the phone. They're trying to paint you as vindictive, but they don't have evidence to counter your documentation. Your banking notation, the text exchange, the timeline of support, it all points to an expectation of repayment. What's their strongest argument? That you never asked for a written agreement. They're claiming that the absence of formal documentation proves it was a gift. But that's not how family loans work. Courts recognize informal agreements all the time, especially when there's a pattern of financial support followed by an expectation of repayment. So we're solid? Very. Their response is defensive, not offensive. They're scrambling. What's next? Mediation. The court requires it before we can go to trial. We'll meet with Reid, his lawyer, and a mediator to see if we can settle. If we can't reach an agreement, we proceed to discovery and then trial. When? 2 weeks. I'll send you the details. And Kian? Martin paused. Prepare yourself. Reid is going to try to appeal to your emotions. He'll apologize. He'll cry. He'll beg. Don't let it work. It won't. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at a bland conference room in a downtown office building. Beige walls, corporate art, a long table with uncomfortable chairs, the kind of place where relationships went to dissolve. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a dark suit, carrying a leather folder with copies of every document Martin had prepared. Bank statements, text transcripts, Timeline of financial support dating back 15 years. Martin was already there, reviewing notes. "Remember," he said quietly. "Stay calm. Let me do the talking. If Reid tries to engage you emotionally, don't take the bait. This is a business transaction now, not a family matter." "I understand." At exactly 2 o'clock, the door opened. Reid walked in. He looked terrible. Thinner than I remembered, at least 15 pounds lighter. Shadows under his eyes like he hadn't slept in weeks. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie slightly crooked. He moved like someone who'd been carrying a weight too heavy to bear. Natalie wasn't with him. His lawyer followed close behind, a young woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a professional demeanor. She introduced herself as Patricia Vance, shook hands with Martin, and avoided looking at me directly. Reid's eyes found mine across the table. I looked away. The mediator entered last, an older man with gray hair and a patient demeanor. He introduced himself as Orion Brennan, outlined the mediation process, and emphasized that everything said in the room was confidential. "We're here to find common ground," he said. "Both parties have valid perspectives. Let's see if we can reach a resolution that works for everyone." Martin started. He was methodical, unemotional, precise. He laid out the facts in chronological order. The transfer of $180,000, the notation in my banking record stating "to be discussed," the text exchange 18 months later, where I asked about repayment, and Reid acknowledged the obligation, the demand letter that went unanswered. He presented bank records, showing the exact date and amount of the transfer. He showed screenshots of the text conversation, Reid's words blown up on printed pages. "Things are tight right now. We'll get to it." Then he presented the timeline I'd written, every instance of financial support I'd provided over the years. College tuition, $87,000, rent during Reid's job search, $14,000, car repairs, $3,200, wedding costs, $12,000, emergency medical expenses, $6,500. The numbers added up to more than $300,000 over 15 years. "This establishes a clear pattern," Martin said. "My client has been the sole financial provider for his brother since childhood. The $180,000 transfer was not an isolated gift, it was the largest in a long series of loans and support payments. And unlike previous instances, this one came with explicit language indicating an expectation of repayment." Reid's lawyer, Patricia, tried to counter. She argued that the $180,000 had been given freely, that there was no written agreement, that family dynamics made it unreasonable to assume repayment. Martin leaned forward. If my client viewed every payment as a gift, why would he specifically notate this one as "to be discussed"? Why would he follow up 18 months later asking about repayment? And why would the defendant acknowledge that obligation in writing? Patricia hesitated. My client's response was vague. It could be interpreted as simply acknowledging his brother's concern, not accepting a debt. "We'll get to it" is not vague, Martin said. It's an explicit acknowledgement of an outstanding obligation. The mediator cleared his throat. "Let's hear from the parties themselves. Mr. Reid Marin, would you like to speak?" Reid looked at his lawyer. She nodded. He turned to face me directly. "Kian," he said, his voice shaking, "please, you raised me. You were everything to me. You were more than a brother. You were a father. I made a mistake with that message. I was angry at something else, and I took it out on you. But this lawsuit, this public humiliation, it's too much. Can't we just talk? Can't we work this out like family?" I kept my expression blank. Martin leaned forward slightly, a subtle signal that I should stay quiet. Reid continued, his voice breaking. "I don't have $198,000. Even if I wanted to pay you back, I can't. Harold can't either. We're barely making our mortgage payments as it is. If you push this, you'll bankrupt us. Is that what you want? To destroy your own brother?" The mediator looked at me. "Mr. Kian Marin, would you like to respond?" Martin started to speak, but I held up a hand. I leaned forward, meeting Reid's eyes for the first time. You destroyed us when you wrote that I wasn't family, I said quietly. The room went silent. Reid's face crumpled. His lawyer touched his arm, whispered something urgently. He shook his head, tears starting to form. The mediator called for a break. When we returned, Patricia offered $75,000. Martin rejected it. 2 weeks later, they offered $160,000. Martin countered with the full amount plus legal fees, $210,000, 12 monthly payments of $17,500, with both Reid and Harold as co-debtors. Reid's head snapped up. You want to drag Harold into this? I spoke calmly. The money paid for his house. He benefited directly. He's already involved. Patricia took another break to consult with Reid. When they returned, Reid looked defeated. We accept, Patricia said quietly. It took another week to arrange a signing session with Harold present. The old man looked confused and angry as he walked into the conference room. I don't understand why I'm here, Harold said. That was a gift to my daughter and son-in-law. Martin slid the settlement agreement across the table. You accepted $180,000 that wasn't yours to keep. You're equally liable for repayment. Harold's face reddened. Now wait just a minute. Sign the agreement, or my client proceeds to trial, Martin said flatly. In which case, your home could be subject to a lien to secure repayment. Harold's hand trembled as he picked up the pen. He signed. So did Reid. Martin handed me the final copy. I took the document, folded it carefully, and placed it in my folder. First payment is due 30 days from today, Martin said. As I walked out, Reid called after me. Kian, wait. I stopped, but didn't turn around. I hope you're happy, he said, his voice hollow. You got what you wanted. I looked back at him. The desperation in his eyes, the weight of the next 12 months pressing down on him, the realization that everything had changed and would never go back. I got what I was owed, I said. 28 days later, my phone buzzed. $1,750 deposited. I checked the transaction and closed the app. The payments came like clockwork after that. Second month, third month, fourth month. Each one arrived on time. By the sixth month, I'd recovered $105,000. Reid never contacted me. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was about closure. Month 9, month 10, month 11. On the first day of the 12th month, around 3 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. $17,500 deposited. I stared at the screen. $210,000 recovered. Every dollar, plus interest, plus legal fees. I sat in my office and opened the banking app. I navigated to the original transfer. The $180,000 marked family support. I changed the notation to loan repaid in full. Then I closed the app, leaned back in my chair, and smiled.